Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. Some of you might have seen me before at a Dutch birding meeting, but it was, I don't remember, maybe 20, 30 years ago, long time ago anyway. So it's a great pleasure to be back here again. And it's wonderful to see so many keen birders here today. I'll be talking about some different things. First of all, I'll give a talk about mainly different research projects that I've been involved with, mainly touching on Asian birds, but I've tried to include some things that may turn up in or may be relevant from a European perspective as well. And so here's the title, Shaking the Tree. We'll start with just an overview of this group here, which is called the superfamily Sylvioidea, which includes all of the warblers, all of the so-called warblers. And these were previously placed in the family Sylviidae. But as you can see here on this tree, the warblers are really spread out all over the tree, with lots of other things like larks and bearded reedlings, swallows, bulbuls, babblers, long-tailed tits, etc. mixed in. So the warblers is not a so-called monophyletic group. That means all the warblers are not closely related to each other. So they were grouped previously together because they all look fairly similar, having a rather thin bill adapted for feeding on insects and so on. So we'll look slightly more in depth on some of these families here, namely the Cettidae, Acrocephalidae, Locustellidae, and Alaudidae. And before that, we'll just look at another bird that was previously considered to belong in this group, the so-called spotted wren babbler. This bird occurs, as you can see on the map here, in Eastern Asia, in the Eastern Himalayas, and down into northern Vietnam, and also in Eastern China. And it's got a very weird song, really strange song, not like anything I've ever heard anywhere. But it's even more strange than that, because it was always believed to be in this big group of birds, which includes all the warblers and babblers, and including the wren babblers. So the wren babblers are in here, represented by this one here. But this one, the spotted wren babbler, is sitting here. Look here. All alone. No friends, no relatives, nothing. Just completely isolated in this tree, in this passerine tree. So it's a very weird bird, and we actually suggested that it should have its own family, including only this species. Very odd. So a look at another odd group of birds. I'm not expecting you to read any of the names here, but look at the colors. All the red ones were previously placed in Bradypterus. All the black ones were placed in Locustella. So Locustella includes the river warbler, grasshopper warbler, all those fairly common Western European birds. And this purple color is Megalurus. This blue here is Cincloramphus and Eremionis and Dromaeocercus. So as you can see here, it's a complete mess. So can we believe that? Well, that's a good question. One should always be skeptical about scientific findings, but actually this is very well supported by several different genes that we analyzed. And it shows that the plumages have not changed very much in these birds. So they're very conserved morphological evolution, except for a few cases all down in this group here, which look very odd. So we proposed a revised classification here with restricting all Locustellas to Eurasia. So all Locustellas occur in Eurasia, and Bradypterus only in Africa. And then Megalurus, mainly in the Australasian region and Oriental region. And as you can see here, there is something strange going on. If you're into taxonomy, you'll note that one species here, it's got a hash. It's actually more closely related, according to this tree, more closely related to the Brodipterus than to Megalurus. And this is the type species of Megalurus, the one that defines the genus. And we actually had some conflict between different data sets here, so we decided to take a conservative view and treat these as all as Megalurus. But possibly that needs to change in the future. So here's an example of a species-level taxonomic study we did on this family, Locustellidae. And we analyzed the russet bush warbler complex. It consists of several different species or subspecies. The taxonomy has changed over the years. And we found that the russet bush warblers breeding in the south of China, Thailand, eastern Himalayas, they had this type of song, which you can see here. Really, really high-pitched song. Very, very high-pitched. And then we heard birds in central China with a much lower-pitched song. More like a frog almost. You see much lower frequency, and there are also several other more subtle differences in the structure of the sonograms here that you can see. We also found consistent differences in morphology, so in structure and plumage between these two types of birds. And we found them. Here's a map of China, where we found the proper russet bush warbler, the Mandeli and Melanorhyncha subspecies occurring in the south of China down to northern Thailand and the eastern Himalayas also. And then we found this low-pitched birds up in the central northern parts of China, and with some geographical overlap in the southern part of the Sichuan province. So here's a more detailed map of the Sichuan province, where all those bicolored circles indicate areas where we found both song types together. And interestingly, they were mainly altitudinally segregated where we found them together. So the high-pitched song was also higher up in the mountains, and the low-pitched song was low down in the mountains. And we also did some genetic analysis, so this is only based on the mitochondrial cytochrome B, but it identifies all those low-pitched birds in one clade here, and all the high-pitched birds in another group. And so there was no overlap between those. There were no individuals that we identified by song and plumage structure from one group showing evidence of belonging in the other group based on DNA. Interestingly, though, these appear to have been separated quite recently, less than 1 million years ago. But since we found consistent differences in plumage, structure, song, sympatric breeding that is occurring at the same places, but ecologically slightly separated, but sometimes occurring right next to each other. We caught, for example, one individual of each species in the same mist net using song of the song of the lower pitched caught one bird, song of the high pitched caught the other one in the same mist net. So sometimes they seem to have even overlapping territories. And therefore we conclude these are two different species, and one of them did not have a name. So the one occurring in central China, we gave the name Locustella Chengyi. And Chengyi honors the late Chinese grand ornithologist Zheng Zhouxin, who was one of China's founders of ornithology, I would say, a very impressive person. And so we decided to name this bird after him, in honor of him. But this tree shows here that some other taxa which have been treated either as subspecies or species, nowadays these three are usually treated as different species. Sibomi in the Philippines, and Montes in Indonesia, and Timorensis also in Indonesia. Oh shit, that's my cell phone, sorry. Can you identify this bird? It's, okay, switch it off, sorry, I'll just stop it. That was an MA leaf warbler singing. I'll just switch this off. That's a bird we described as a new species in, I think, 1995, and it makes a very good telephone signal, actually. Anyway, so we thought, well, these birds are all fairly, these ones differ from each other as much as these ones, which we considered as separate species. So we concluded these are probably better treated as 6 species altogether, actually. This family, the Setidae, which includes Setis warbler, which you all know very well, also includes lots of other species in the genus Setia. All the black ones, all these brown ones are placed in Setia. So you see the black ones are in lots of different places. So again, a very, very weird phylogeny with some really brightly colored birds, like these ones here, mixed in with these Setia warblers. And look at these little Tesias and this one here. So it's a very, very odd phylogeny. All the different colors represent different genera. So you've got, in addition to Setia, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different genera. And they're all mixed in here. All mixed in with Setia. So a very weird situation. And those are probably the most dramatically different ones. But if you look at these two, these are each other's closest relatives. These are so-called sister species. The gray, oops, sorry. The gray, what's it called? Gray-breasted prinia? Not prinia, warbler, brunifrons, Setia brunifrons anyway, and this chestnut-crowned Tesia are each other's closest relatives, sister species, and they don't look anything like each other. They've never been placed in the same genus. Nobody's ever thought they're closely related. But if you listen to their songs, this is the Setia. And the other one, much more similar. Not identical, but much more similar than the plumages and structure. So that's quite interesting. This one's also interesting because it occurs only in a small area in the East Africa, in the mountains of East Africa, whereas all the others are Asian, except this one, the Setis warbler, which also occurs in Europe and Northern Africa. But this one is all isolated in a tiny area in the Eastern African mountains. So we can't keep it like this. We can't retain this old traditional taxonomy. We have to change some names here, and we suggested these changes here. So it's a horrible name, Horonis, really horrible, but that name was available for this group. So according to nomenclatural rules, we had to use that name, even though it's a horrible sounding name. And we move on to the reed warblers in the family Acrocephalidae. All the black ones are Acrocephalus. So you can see that's a fairly well-kept group, which actually agrees fairly well with the phylogeny here. But the Hippolaias, you see, are spread into different groups here. And some of the Hippolaias, the Pallida, Opaca, Caligata, and Rama, the booted warbler, and what are they called? Sykes, and those are more closely related to two African birds, which were previously placed in the genus Chloropita, which are all yellow, bright yellow on the underparts. And you know, and here's one more Acrocephalus and another Chloropita up here. So it's a bit messy, but not quite as messy as some of the other groups we looked at before. And quite interestingly, these groups here, this represents the small, mainly streaked Palearctic birds like the sedge warbler. Should I forget all the English names? Yeah, you know those. and this group here also represents mainly Palearctic birds, but small unstreaked ones. So the common ones, reed warbler, marsh warbler, and those, Blythe's reed. And this group here is the large, mainly large-sized birds, which have a wider distribution. Some occurring in Africa, some all the way to Australasia. So we proposed a revised classification here, placing all these in the genus Iduna and restricting Hippolais to the Icterine and Melodius and olive tree, that group, and then Acrocephalus for here. So the larks, another weird group. And I'm not expecting you to read any names here again, except for these ones here. But look at the colors. All the colors represent different genera according to the traditional taxonomy, the traditional morphology base that's based on when people looked at them in the skin collections and they said, well, these ones look similar, we placed them in one genus, and this group here we put in another genus. So all those colors represent different genera. And as you can see, it's a totally messy, totally messy. And this shows that, provided that this tree is true, which it certainly isn't perfectly true, but it's certainly true to some extent anyway. And it's the best hypothesis so far. And according to this, there's been a lot of conservative evolution within the larks, and then some genera, some groups or species have really just diverged very much, just like in the previous Cettidae and Locustellidae. So if we just zoom in on one of these clades here, you see the Calandrella larks, the lesser and Asian short-toed larks are here, whereas the greater short-toed larks and Hume's short-toed larks and Cinerea, the African, lost the name again, redcap, thank you, are down here, and these ones, the clade with the greater short-toed lark, is more closely related to the horned lark group than to these lesser short-toed lark group. That's really odd, isn't it? Because these ones, they look very similar to each other. And if you look at this, the Melanocorypha, you all knew already that it's an odd group with the black lark, the male black lark, looking very different from the others. And actually we showed that the white-winged lark is not closely related to this group, even though the Mongolian lark is very similar to the white-winged lark. The white-winged lark is actually more closely related to skylark. So very odd. And also in southern Africa, we've got two groups that are very similar to some European birds. So the Dupont's lark is very similar to some southern African larks, but they're not at all closely related. We've got another, this is a Stark's lark from southern Africa, which is not at all closely related to the Dunn's lark, but they look very similar to each other. And it's really odd that Dunn's lark and Dupont's lark are closely related, and also that these two are closely related to the lesser short-toed larks. Lots of strange things going on. And here's another strange thing that we found in the same study. We looked at we looked at some larks in more detail, and including the greater and Hume's short-toothed larks. And when we looked at the genes here, this is only based on one locus, the mitochondrial cytochrome B. But according to this, the Mongolian subspecies of greater short-toothed lark was more closely related to the Hume's short-toothed lark. And they have been separated for a very, very long period of time, estimated to 6 million years ago. Whereas the most closely related, the most recently diverged sister pair in this lark study that we did was the Tibetan lark and Mongolian lark, which breed sympatrically. They breed together in the same area. And they've been separated for a much shorter period of time. And also these African crested larks, which have been suggested to be different species because they overlap a little bit and don't seem to interbreed very much. They've been separated much shorter. And we've just done a paper that's been submitted where we use thousands of loci, thousands of base pairs, SNPs, in a study to show that this is actually correct based on those data as well. So these should be treated as different species, even though they look very, very similar to each other. Very little is known about this one, though. I've only seen it on migration and in winter. I've never found it on the breeding grounds. It's supposed to breed all throughout the Tibetan plateau, but it obviously doesn't, because I've never seen it there, only on migration. So the babblers and white eyes and sylvidae is one big group of birds. And we'll just look at the sylvidae here, the proper sylvidae, the family sylvidae that's shrunk from being huge to being tiny. And sylvia, here represented by the black cap, is mixed in with, for example, parrotbills and mysonis. Really odd, isn't it? So they're not really warblers at all, but as we showed before, warblers are not warblers. So here's an example from the genus Sylvia, the lesser white-throat complex. And it really is very complex. Taxonomically, it's a nightmare. We've sampled all the different subspecies in this complex from all throughout the breeding range. And we came up with, somebody else has got an interesting signal. So this is what we found. This tree is only based on cytochrome B, a mitochondrial gene. We tried a few nuclear genes as well, but didn't get any, didn't find any differences. So we concluded these have been separated too recently, or there's something strange going on. But anyway, based on this particular gene, the cytochrome B, the picture is completely different from what people had thought before. And there's been lots of different taxonomic suggestions over the years. For example, Blythe has sometimes been considered to be the same subspecies, so it's been synonymized with Curoca from Western Europe. They've sometimes been considered identical, so Blythe has not even been recognized as a taxon. And these two have sometimes been considered the same species as Halimodendri from Kazakhstan. And Margillanica from northern China has often been considered the same species as Mindula. Mindula has sometimes been treated as its own species, and Altea is usually treated as a separate species. So, according to this tree, none of the old suggestions is valid. But we don't know for sure, of course, whether this is correct. But based on this tree, they seem to have been, some of these groups seem to have been separated for a long time, and it might be appropriate to treat them as even 6 different species. But we need more data, we need more genes, we need more studies in the field, and so on. So we'll see what happens. Story's not finished. Move on to another group of birds, the Muscicapidae, the family Muscicapidae. Oh, I forgot to say, this is a study by George Sangster et al. Forgot to write that here. This shows that all the ones in purple are so-called chats. We've got the wheat ears, we've got the bush chats, we've got different bush robins, you've got your starbird here, the Siberian ruby throat in here. We've got nightingales, we've got common European robin, we've got some other chats down here. So again, what was previously considered to be chats is not a monophyletic group. It's not a group where all the species and genera are each other's closest relatives. So you see you've got flycatchers, various flycatchers mixed in. You've got the rock thrushes, redstarts, forktails. Here's some other flycatchers down here. So it's a very weird situation again. And we'll just look at one example. These are some very, very colorful flycatchers from Asia, from a just published study, showing that this one here, which is treated as the blue-throated flycatcher subspecies Clossie, breeding in southern Vietnam. And here is another blue-throated flycatcher, Glaucicomans, from central China. And this is the Hainan blue flycatcher. They've been placed in the same genus, these ones, but never been considered to be particularly closely related. But we found some odd-looking birds in China, sort of intermediate, and we found some intermediate birds also in Vietnam between these. And the song of this one here is fairly soft and simple, high-pitched. Whereas this one in China, one of my favorite bird songs. It's amazing. It's fabulous, isn't it? So the songs are very different. Okay, enough, thank you. He knows he's good, so he doesn't want to stop. So this one is very different from all the others. All the others have very similar songs, but this one is very different. And looking at a tree, this is based on multiple genes here. All the ones with orange text, orange names are the blue-throated flycatchers. Whereas the black ones here, this one here, is the Hainan blue flycatcher. As you can see here, the blue-throated flycatcher of the subspecies Clossie from southern Vietnam and the Hainan blue flycatcher, which look so different from each other, are totally indistinguishable by the markers that we have analyzed so far. So it's a very, very odd situation, and we're at the moment trying to sort this out using much more data, genomic data. So we found, on the other hand, we found some quite deep divergences here. So this is the Chinese, the one I just played before, the beautiful singer. That's here, quite different. But really no differentiation here. So how many species are there? Well, we don't know yet. Another very weird thing, you all know the wagtail, the pipids up here and the wagtails, they're closely related. And you all know what a pipid looks like. It's a tree pipid. You know the wagtails, not maybe this is an African species, but anyway. Look at here, what are they doing there? The longclaws, the African longclaws and golden pipid are actually more closely related to this group of pipids than these pipids to the other pipids. Very, very peculiar. And even more weird, look at this. What is this, a nuthatch? No. This is the madanga, endemic to the island of Buru in Indonesia. The Madanga or rufous-throated white-eye, he was called before. So people have thought this is a white-eye, but it's actually a pipit. And it's closely related to the tree pipit and olive-backed pipits. But it climbs on tree trunks and branches in the canopy, and it doesn't look anything like a pipit, except when you look at it really closely. There are only 4 specimens in the world, all in the American Museum, and I've examined all those. And for me, as a pipit freak, it's definitely a pipit when you look at it closely. It's got a typical pipit bill, typical pipit tail, typical pipit legs and claws, etc. So it is a pipit, undoubtedly, but it's changed so completely ecologically and morphologically. Same with this guy here, the Sao Tome short tail. I mean, short tail, long tail, not really similar. And all brown, and also occurring inside the forest, deep inside the forest, in the closed forest. So totally different from all the wagtails, which are out in the open habitats. Again, very, very odd. It's a very strange evolution. Here's another puzzling complex. And again, I wish to stress complex, because it is complex. And I believe that the Dutch Birding Association treats all these as different species. Is that right? Why not? Yes, good question. Why not? I won't argue with you. You're free to do that. It all depends on your species concept. They are diagnosably different from each other. They all look very different. In most plumages, even juveniles are in most cases quite different. But when you look at DNA, all these ones, Yareli from the British Isles, Alba from Northern Europe, Baikalensis from further east in Asia, Ocularis from northeast Siberia, Lugans from Japan, and Subpersonata from Morocco are just like this. No difference, all the same. You can find the same mitochondrial DNA in a Yareli or an Alba from Western Europe and a Lugans from Japan. Strange, isn't it? And interestingly, Subpersonata from Morocco is, you see, it's in 2 different places. So we've got 2 individuals that are very different from all the others, even more different than the Japanese wagtail, which is definitely a different species. Whereas one individual is here with these. And then we found one group here consisting of Personata from Central Asia, Alboides from also from Himalayas and Central China, and Leucopsis from Southern China, Eastern China, in one group. And then another group here with some individuals of Alba and some individuals of Yareli. You can see the colors, the geographical distributions here on this map. So here's one group, the red dots, all this, one group, and then these yellow ones here. So how many species? Well, I'm not sure. Well, you are sure, because you but to me, my species concept is sort of fluid. And it doesn't really matter. To me, species are not so important because I'm not a lister. So it doesn't matter. The interesting thing here is that these have diverged and radiated very recently. So it's a very recent thing. And it's remarkable that they have evolved so much plumage differences in a very short period of time. And I'm presently trying to sort this out using genomic data. So we'll see what comes out of that. So how are we doing on time? I've still got a few minutes left. So finally, the plain-backed thrush and long-tailed thrush complex is very interesting. I've been spending a number of years studying those. And the plain-backed thrush complex has a wide distribution all the way from Pakistan to central China. And the long-tailed thrush has got fairly similar distribution. we found that there are actually different groups of plainback thrushes. In eastern Himalayas, we found two groups which occurred in different habitats. One group was in the alpine zone, really 4,200 meters and above, completely barren, whereas another group was down in the forest, in the good coniferous forest below 4,200 meters. And in central China, we found another group in the forest, but varying from really good coniferous forest to rather poor secondary forest. And these have different songs. This is the alpine. It's a really scratchy song, very odd, not thrush-like at all, I would say. Whereas the one in the forest in the eastern Himalayas has got this beautiful song. So we could actually stand in one spot in the eastern Himalayas at 4,200 meters and hear, oops, sorry, what happened? And hear, this one above the tree limit, and then hear this one below the tree limit, having really, really different songs. At first, we couldn't see any differences between them when we saw them in the field, because this one was extremely shy. This was fairly easily seen, but this one was extremely shy and hard to see well, so we couldn't detect any differences. But together with Pamela Rasmussen, we've been studying those in museums, and Pam has been to probably every museum collection in the world that has samples, that has specimens of these, and taken lots of detailed measurements and studied every specimen in detail. And what we found was that there were consistent differences in plumage. For example, if you look here, you see it's fairly pale on the lores, and it's got fairly pale, extensively pale ear coverts, the pale is usually reaching all the way up here, whereas the pale on the ear coverts is usually restricted to the lower rear corner, and it's much darker in this area. It's got a longer, stronger bill, which is usually almost all black, whereas this one's usually got a distinct pale pinkish base to the lower mandible. This one's quite often got distinct wing bars, which this one usually lacks, and so on. So there are a number of differences in structure as well as plumage between these. And the birds in China, in central China, also differed, for example, in having a rather thin, dark laurel stripe, fairly thinly pale streaked ear coverts, and relatively long tail, fairly large bill, and so on. So there were consistent differences in plumage as well as song. And sorry, I have to listen to these again now at the same time. So here's the Chinese one, the central Chinese one, singing like this. It's got an even more beautiful, even more thrush-like song. That's it. And then the long-tailed thrush, very different song. Very different song, very odd song. So here's the phylogeny, which we just published, and it shows that we found 4 different groups of these. So here is the forest one in the eastern Himalayas, and here's the alpine one in the eastern Himalayas, which we also found in the mountains of central China. And here's the Chinese, central Chinese forest one. So all individuals grouped nicely together like this. And then we found 3 old museum specimens collected in Yunnan province of China, which were very different. They looked identical to these ones, but genetically they were very different. And the long-tailed thrush is down here. So as you can see, the difference between these ones, the Himalayan ones, the alpine one, and the Himalayan forest one, is pretty similar to the difference compared to long-tailed, and it's actually greater than the difference compared to these two, which have never been considered to be the same species, look very, very different from each other. So they're very, very old, these ones. And we describe this as a new species because it did not have a name, this one. So the one in the eastern Himalayas, which we also found in the adjacent part of, in the Yunnan province in China, we described as a new species, and we named it after Dr. Salim Ali from India, the renowned Indian ornithologist. So we decided to honor him by naming this bird after him. And this one, we don't know yet what it is. We need to try and find it in the field. So thanks very much for your attention.